This is why in our time something new must break in. At that time the same movement took hold which today, through theosophy, makes popular the elementary teachings of spiritual life, in order to create, once again, a new inner impulse that will later be able to reveal itself outwardly. The inner always comes later to outer expression. An illness is the karmic result of earlier wrongdoing, for instance, lying. When something of this kind becomes outer reality, it manifests as illness. Epidemics can be traced far back to the misdeeds of a people. They are something imperfect, which from being inward has been exteriorized. The sixth sense is the Kundalini light radiating warmth. The seventh is the synthesizing sense. The end of Lecture 9. You are listening to RudolfSteinerAudio.com. As well, you can hear these podcasts at rudolfsteiner.podbean.com. There are two publishing houses, steinerbooks.org in America and rudolfsteinerpress.com in England, which are the sole publishers of Steiner into English and have given me permission to do these recordings. Please consider patronizing them as well. This is a reading of Collected Works, Volume 93a by Rudolf Steiner. The lecture notes of participants of 31 lectures entitled Foundations of Esotericism, translated by Vera and Judith Compton Burnett. This is Lecture 10, given in Berlin on the 5th of October, 1905. If we consider man's being in its entirety, we have to begin with the physical body, then the etheric, then the astral body. The physical body of man can be seen by everyone. The etheric body becomes visible when the physical body is suggested away by a strong act of will. Then the space of the physical body remains filled with the etheric body. The occultist considers actually the etheric as being the lowest body. It is the body according to which the physical body is formed. Taking the descending line, the form of the etheric body is the reverse of the physical. It is only in the ascending line that they are identical. A woman has a masculine etheric body and a man a feminine etheric body. Around the etheric body appears the astral body. It is the outer form of the entire content of the soul. For passions, emotions, impulses, desires, joy, unhappiness, enthusiasm, and so on. It manifests itself in forms of every description. The surrounding part shows cloud formations. It radiates the most varied colors. Frequently, somewhat tattered formations are attached to it. The forms and colors are different and changing. Green shows sympathy and compassion for one's fellow human being. The lower levels of the population show much red in the astral body, brownish red, brick red, blood red. Especially with droshky drivers, one can see such a red indicative of the lower passions. With every human being, all the fluctuations of the astral body are enclosed in an egg-shaped sheath. This has an underlying blue color and shows, as an important factor, a dark violet spot in the middle of the brain. Helena Petrovna Blavatsky calls this egg-shaped sheath the auric egg. In the case of little children, the auric egg is predominant. In their case, many bright, luminous clouds of color appear within it. In the lower parts, however, little children also have dark clouds, indicating lower impulses. This is the inherited karma that they have in common with their ancestors, the, quote, sins of the fathers, close quote. These sins of the fathers are inherited down to the 7th generation. People's characteristics can be traced back as far as the 7th generation of forefathers. After the 7th generation, heredity dies out. One reckons 3 generations to a century. The man of today, therefore, still shows certain good or bad qualities coming from what was good or bad in his ancestors of the 17th century. Thus one can look backward on one's forefathers as far as 200 years or rather more. To see how the auric egg has been formed, we must consider the development of a cosmic body. The condition of the earth lying nearest to our present studies is characterized as the physical condition. In theosophical literature, a condition of form is called a globe, and one therefore speaks of the physical globe. As physical globe, the earth is the fourth globe in a development of 7 states of being. 3 other conditions preceded the physical globe, and a further 3 are still to follow. Before the earth became physical, it was astral. Everything living upon earth was at that time present only in the astral. When man has gone through the 6th and 7th root races, epochs, he will have become so spiritualized that he will again have an astral form. This future astral condition of form, however, will contain all the fruits of evolution. 7 conditions of form together make up a round. At the present time, the earth is going through its 4th round, and this is the mineral. During this time, it is the task of mankind to work upon the mineral kingdom. A human being is already working on the mineral kingdom when he takes a flint and hammers it into a wedge-shaped tool with which he makes other objects, when he transports rocks and builds pyramids out of the stones, when he makes tools out of metals, when he conducts electric current in a network over the earth. In all this, man is working upon the mineral kingdom. Thus man puts into service the whole mineral kingdom. He makes the earth into something entirely of his own devising. When the painter turns his mind to a combination of colors, he is also working upon the mineral kingdom. We are now in the midst of this activity, and in the course of the next races, epochs, the earth will have become completely transformed, so that eventually there will be no single atom on the earth that has not been worked upon by mankind. In earlier times, these atoms became more and more solidified. Now, however, they are becoming increasingly separated. Radioactivity did not exist in earlier times, and could not therefore be discovered. It has only existed for a few thousand years, because now atoms split up more and more. When the 4th round comes to an end, the entire mineral kingdom will have been worked upon by the hand of man. When it has been completely worked through by man, then, in order that the fruits of this work can be manifested, the earth will pass over into an astral, in brackets plastic astral, condition in which forms can develop. The earth then passes over into a mental, intellectual globe, and then into the higher mental archetypal condition, the arupic. It then disappears altogether out of these conditions into a shorter pralaya. It then enters once more into a new arupic condition, then of the next, the 5th round, then into a rupic condition, and then into an astral condition. After this it appears physically once more. Everything which man worked into the mineral kingdom during the 4th round reappears, and arises as the plant kingdom. For instance, Cologne Cathedral will appear as a plant in the next round. Between the last arupic condition of the 4th round and the first arupic condition of the 5th round, the earth goes through a pralaya. Then in the 5th round, the previous mineral kingdom appears in all its forms as the plant kingdom. In the arupic condition of the 5th round, everything is contained that man has worked over in the mineral round. At first this reappears in the arupic condition in the pure akasha. This condition is in fact called akasha. In the beginning of each new round, everything is to be found in the akasha. Later there are only imprints. Thus in these imprints we have the whole earth with all its beings. In the transition from the 3rd to the 4th round, all the beings which came into existence in the 3rd round also reappear. Returning to the transition from the third to the fourth round, with further development out of the akasha, everything has to assume a denser form. This takes place in the rupa condition of the earth. This more material form is called, in occultism, for example in certain passages from H.P. Blavatsky, the ether. In this ether earth, everything is contained. All beings were contained in thought, but nevertheless in the background the akasha exists as a foundation. The ether densifies further to the astral light. In this astral light radiates the third globe, or condition of form, the astral earth. It radiates in the purest astral light, and this astral light is in fact entirely composed of the same substance in which later man's auric egg shines out. This is especially the case with quite young children, who are only a few months old. After this, the earth passes over into its present physical condition. Then, as the actual earth, it becomes ever more and more physical. In the same degree, however, in which it becomes ever more physical, it separates off from itself the individual auric eggs for mankind. These differentiate themselves as when, in a vessel filled with water, one part of the water freezes to ice, while the other part rises up in pearl-like water drops. Thus, on the one side, the physical earth separates off, and on the other side, the auric eggs become, as it were, pearl-like drops for human evolution. At first, the auric egg seems to be undifferentiated. Actually, however, it is not undifferentiated. It may be compared with the following. If we have a solution of cooking salt, it appears as a uniform grayish mass. If we let it stand, the beautiful cubic crystals of salt are precipitated. In the auric egg, those forces were inherent which produced the etheric body, the linga sharira. Out of what became solid earth there also emerged later what had already gone through a development on the old moon. This contained, as predisposition, what eventually became the lower kingdoms, as far as the first vertebrates, up to the snake. The vertebrate animals which followed were not there on the old moon. They were first added on the earth. Thus the invertebrate animals emerged from the earth when it densified to a physical condition, as did also the plants and mineral kingdom. At the time when all these separated forms had emerged, mankind had entered into the Lemurian age. The ever-densifying human being developed from the first, the Polarian race, to the race of the Hyperboreans. This was followed by the Lemurian age. It was then that the development of the vertebrate animals entered its first stage, and it is from that time that they have continued to evolve. So we have to distinguish, firstly, akasha, secondly, ether, thirdly, astral light, fourthly, earth, fifthly, the auric egg. This is called a spiral, in German Wirbel. Until the earth stage, the fourth condition of form, the earth became ever denser. At the price of this increasing densification, the astral light became individualized after the solid had thrust itself out. The auric eggs of human beings are the individualized astral light. One can therefore read in the astral light, not the deeds, but the emotions bound up with them. These one can read in the astral light. For example, Caesar conceived the idea of crossing the Rubicon, and this roused in him certain feelings and desires. What took place at that time corresponds to a combination of astral impulses. The physical deeds on the physical plane have vanished for all eternity. Caesar's advance can no longer be seen in the astral light, but the impulse which drove him to it has remained there. The karmic astral correlations with what takes place on the physical plane remain in the astral light. One must accustom oneself to look away from all physical perceptions and only to see the karmic impulses. One must hold fast to these and consciously transpose them back into the physical. There is no purpose in looking for something which might be seen as though one were looking at a photograph. The greatest impulses of world history can, however, no longer be read in the astral light, for the impulses of the great initiates were passionless. Whoever therefore reads only in the astral light, for him the whole work of the initiates is absent. For example, the content of the book titled The Great Initiates by Edward Schuré could not have been found in the astral light. Such impressions are only inscribed in the ether. What one can read in the astral light in connection with what the initiates have done is based on an illusion, because one can only read the results of the lives of the great initiates in the impulses of their pupils. Pupils and even entire peoples have experienced strong and passionate emotions in regard to the actions of the great initiates, and these have remained in the astral light. But it is so difficult to study the deepest motives of the great initiates because they are only present in the ether. Cosmic events, metamorphoses, such as those of Atlantis, remain at a still higher level, no longer in the ether but in the actual Akasha, that is the Akashic Chronicle. This latter is nevertheless connected in a certain way with the most earthly concerns of mankind. For the human being is connected with the great happenings of the cosmos. Every single person is to be found, sketched, as it were, in the Akashic Chronicle. What is present there continues further and works its way into the ether and the astral light. The individual human being becomes ever more clearly discernible the more one seeks for him in the lower spheres. And one must study all these spheres in order to understand the real mechanism of karma. The end of Lecture 10. You are listening to RudolfSteinerAudio.com. As well, you can hear these podcasts at RudolfSteiner.podbean.com. Please consider becoming a patron. There are two publishing houses, SteinerBooks.org in America and RudolfSteinerPress.com in England, which are the sole publishers of Steiner into English and have given me permission to do these recordings. Please consider patronizing them as well. This is a reading of Collected Works, Volume 93a by Rudolf Steiner. It's the lecture notes of 31 lectures by participants, entitled Foundations of Esotericism, translated by Vera and Judith Compton Burnett. This is Lecture 11, given in Berlin on the 6th of October, 1905. Today we are going to explain how karma works and make clear to ourselves how it is connected with the so-called three worlds. All other worlds, with the exception of these three, hardly come into consideration when it is a question of human development. The relevant three are the physical, astral, and mental worlds. In the day condition of consciousness, we are in the physical world. There, in a certain sense, we have purely and simply the physical world before us. We need only direct our senses outward in order to have the physical world, as such, before us. But the moment we look on the physical world with interest, approach it with feeling, we are already partly in the astral world and only partly in the physical world. Only the beginnings of living purely in the physical world are present today in human life. For example, when one simply contemplates a work of art without experiencing any wish to possess it. Such a contemplation of a work of art is an important act of the soul, when, forgetful of self, one works as though on a spiritual task. This living purely in the physical world, forgetting oneself, is very rare. It is only seldom that nature is looked at in pure contemplation, for usually many other feelings are involved. Nevertheless, this selfless living in physical nature is of the very greatest importance, for only so can man have a true consciousness of self. In all other worlds, the ordinary man is still immersed in a world of unconsciousness. In the physical world, man is not only aware of his self, he can also become selfless. His day consciousness is, however, not yet selfless. if he is unable to forget himself. Here the physical world is not the hindrance, but the playing in of the astral and mental worlds. If, however, he forgets himself, the separateness vanishes, and he finds his, in quotes, self spread out into what is outside. But it is only in physical life that present-day man can develop this consciousness of self without separateness. Consciousness of self we call the ego, the I capital. Man can only become conscious of self within an environment. Only when he gains senses adapted to a particular world can he become self-conscious in that world. At present he only has senses for the physical world, but the other worlds continually play into the consciousness of self and cloud it. When feelings play into it, it is the astral world. When one thinks, the mental world plays into the consciousness. Most people's thoughts are nothing more than reflections of the environment. It is very rare to have thoughts which are not connected in this way. Man only has such higher thoughts when senses awaken for the mental world, so that he not only thinks the thoughts, but perceives them around him as beings. He then has the same consciousness of self in the mental world as that possessed by the chela, the initiate. When someone tries to eliminate first the physical world around him, then all impulses, passions, changes of mood, and so on, usually no thoughts are left. Let us only try to picture everything that influences man inasmuch as he lives in space and time. Let us try to call up before the soul everything connected with the place where we live and the time in which we live. Everything that the soul continually has within it as thoughts is dependent on space and time. All this has a transient value. One must therefore pass on from the reflected impressions of the senses and allow an enduring thought content to live in one in order gradually to develop devachanic senses. A sentence such as that from Title Light on the Path, quote, "Before the eyes can see, they must be incapable of tears," close quote, holds good for all times and all places. When we allow such a sentence to live within us, then something lives in us which is beyond space and time. This is a means, a force, which gradually allows devachanic senses to awaken in the soul for the eternal in the world. Thus, man has his share in the three worlds. It is only gradually, however, that he has come into this situation. He was not always in the physical world. Only by degrees did he become physical and acquire physical senses. Previously he was on the higher planes. He descended from the astral plane to the physical, and before this, from the mental plane. The latter we divide into two parts, the lower mental or rupa plane, where everything is already differentiated, and the upper mental or arupa plane, where everything is undifferentiated in a germinal condition. Man has descended from the arupa plane through the rupa plane and the astral plane to the physical plane. Only on the physical plane did he become conscious of self. On the astral plane he is not conscious of self, and on the rupa and arupa planes still less so. On the physical plane, man for the first time came into contact with external objects in his immediate surroundings. Whenever a being encounters external objects, this marks the beginning of self-awareness. On the higher planes, life was still completely enclosed within itself. When man lived on the astral plane, the only reality he had arose out of his own inner life. This was, in its very nature, a picture consciousness. Even though this was a vivid experience, it was nevertheless only a picture that arose within him. Of this, present daydreams are only a weak reminder. When, for instance, an astral human being approached salt, this affected him unconsciously, and a picture of it would have arisen within him. If he approached someone who was sympathetic to him, he would not have seen him externally, but a feeling of sympathy would have arisen within him. This life in the astral was one of absolute selfhood and separateness. Only on the physical plane can man relinquish his separateness, in that, through the medium of his senses, he perceives objects, merges himself with his surroundings, with the not I, capital. Therein lies the importance of the physical plane. If man had not set foot on the physical plane, he would never have been able to relinquish his separateness and turn his senses outward. This is actually where work on the development of selflessness begins. Everything except pure contemplation of outer physical things belongs more to the ego, the I. One must accustom oneself to live on higher planes, just as selflessly as man has begun to do on the physical plane, albeit up to now but rarely. The objects of the physical plane compel man to become selfless and to give something to the object, which is not I. In regard to desires, to that which lives in the soul, man still orders his life in accordance with his desires. He must learn on the physical plane to renounce his desires. That is the first step. The next step is to order himself not according to his own wishes, but according to those coming to him from outside. Further, when man consciously and out of his own will does not act in accordance with the thoughts that arise within him, but surrenders himself to thoughts which are not his own, then he soars upward to the devachanic plane. We must therefore seek in the higher worlds for something lying outside us, in order to relate ourselves to it as we do to objects in the physical world. Hence we must consider the wishes of the initiates. The occult student learns to know the wishes which are right for humanity, and he orders himself in accordance with them, just as through external compulsion one orders oneself according to sense objects. Culture and the education of wishes lead us to the astral plane. When one becomes selfless in thoughts, allowing the eternal thoughts of the masters of wisdom to pass through our souls, through concentration and meditation on the thoughts of the masters, then one also perceives the thoughts of the surrounding world. The occult student can already become a master on the astral plane, but on the mental plane, this is only possible for the higher masters. In the first place, man stands before us in his physical nature. He lives at the same time in the astral and mental worlds, but has self-awareness only in the physical world. He must traverse the entire physical world until his awareness of self has absorbed everything that the physical world can teach him. Here man says to himself, I, capital. He connects his I with the things around him, learns to expand his I through contemplation. It flows outward and becomes one with the objects which he has completely comprehended. If we had already comprehended the entire physical world, we should no longer need it, for then we should have it within us. At present, however, man has within him only a part of the physical world. Born in his first incarnation as a Lemurian, the human being who is just at the point of directing his ego, his I, toward the physical world, knows as yet but little of it. When, however, he comes to his last incarnation, he must have united the entire physical world with his I. In the physical world, man is left to himself. Nobody leads him. He is truly God-forsaken. When he came forth from the astral world, the gods forsook him. In the physical world, he had to learn to become his own master. Here, therefore, he can only live, as he actually does live, swinging pendulum-like between truth and error. He must grope about and seek his way for himself. For the most part, now, he is groping in the dark. His gaze is turned outward. He has freedom of choice, but he is also exposed to error. On the astral plane, man had no such freedom. There he was subject to compulsion from the powers standing behind him. Like a kind of marionette, he still dangled on the strings of the gods. They still had to guide him. Insofar as man today is still a soul being, the gods still live in him. Here freedom and unfreedom are strongly mixed. His wishes are continually changing. This ebb and flow of wishes proceeds from within. Here it is the gods who are working in man. Man is still less free on the rupa plane of the mental world, and even less free on the arupa plane of the higher mental world. Man gradually becomes free on the physical plane, the more through knowledge he has become incapable of error. To the same degree that he works on the physical plane and learns to know it, he gains the faculty of carrying up into the arupa plane what he has learned to know in the physical world. The arupa plane is in itself formless, but gains form through human life. Man gathers the results of the lessons he has learned on the physical plane and carries these as firmly established forms in the soul up into the arupa plane. This is why in the Greek mysteries the soul was called a bee, the arupa plane a beehive, and the physical earth a field of flowers. This was taught in the Greek mysteries. Now, what was it that drove the soul down onto the physical plane? It was desire, craving. In no other way does one descend to a lower plane, except through desire. Previously, the soul was in the astral world. This is the world of wishes. Everything which the gods in the astral world have implanted into human beings was purely a world of wishes. The most outstanding attribute of these pre-Lemurian beings was the wish for the physical. Man at that time had a real craving for the physical. He had within him an unconscious blind craving for the physical. This craving is only to be appeased through its satisfaction. Through the ideas, through the aspects of knowledge which he gains, this craving for the physical disappears. After death, the soul goes to the astral plane, and thence to the rupa and arupa planes. What the soul has gained, it deposits there. What it has not yet brought with it, what is still unknown, drives it down again. This engenders the longing for new incarnations. How long the soul remains on the arupa plane depends upon how much the human being has gained on the physical plane. In the case of the least developed human being, this is very little, and so in his case there is only a weak flashing up onto the arupa plane. Then he descends again to the physical world. One who has learned everything in the physical world no longer needs to leave the arupa plane, no longer needs to return to the physical plane, for he has fulfilled his duty in the physical world. In regard to his astral being, man today still half belongs to the astral world. The astral sheath has been half broken through, and he perceives the world of the physical through his senses. When he succeeds in living on the astral plane as he now lives on the physical plane, when he learns to make observations there in a similar way, then he also carries the perceptions of the astral plane up to the arupa plane. What he then bears upward from the astral plane streams, however, still higher, from the arupa plane up to the next higher, the buddhi plane. That too which he achieves on the rupa plane through meditation and concentration, he takes with him up to the arupa plane, and there gives it over to still higher planes. That part of the human being which is astral is opened half toward the physical world and half toward higher worlds. When it is opened to the physical world, he allows himself to be directed by the perceptions of the sense world. From the other side, he is subject to direction from above. The same is the case with his mental body. The latter is also partly directed from outside and partly directed from the inner world by the gods, the devas. Because this is so, man must dream and sleep. Now, we can also understand the nature of sleeping and dreaming. To dream means to turn toward the inner deva forces. Man dreams almost the whole night, only he does not remember it. During sleep, the mental body is continually guided by the devas. Man has as yet no consciousness of self on the higher planes, hence in dream he is not self-conscious. He begins to be so on the astral plane. In deep sleep he is on the mental plane. There he has absolutely no self-consciousness. It is only on the physical plane that man is awake. Here his ego, his I, is present and finds its full expression. The astral ego cannot yet fully express itself on the physical plane, and must therefore at times leave the body. Man must sleep in order that this can take place. The conditions of dreaming and sleeping are only a repetition of earlier development. On the astral plane he was in a state of dream. On the mental plane he slept. He repeats these conditions every night. Only when he has acquired senses for the other planes does he no longer dream and no longer sleep, but he then perceives realities. The occult pupil learns to perceive such realities on the astral plane. He then has a reality around him. Whoever carries his development to a still higher stage is surrounded by a reality even in deep sleep. Then begins continuity of consciousness. One must understand this sequence of delicate concepts. Then one comprehends why man, when he has been on the higher planes, again descends. What he does not yet know, what he has not yet recognized, what the Buddhists call avidya, not knowing, drives him back into physical existence. Avidya is the first of the forces of karma. According to Buddhistic teaching, there are 12 karmic forces which drive man down. These together are called nidanas. As man gradually descends, the way in which karma takes hold becomes apparent. Avidya is the first effect. It is the opposite pole to what meets man on the physical plane. Because he treads the physical plane and there unites himself with something, a reaction is called forth. Action always calls forth reaction. Everything that man does in the physical world also produces a reaction and works back as karma. Action and reaction is the technique, the mechanism of karma. The end of Lecture 11. You are listening to RudolfSteinerAudio.com. As well, these podcasts can be heard at RudolfSteiner.podbean.com. Please consider becoming a patron. As well, there are two publishing houses, SteinerBooks.org in America and RudolfSteinerPress.com in England, which are the sole publishers of Steiner into English and have given me permission to do these recordings. Please consider patronizing them as well. This is a reading of Collected Works Volume 93a by Rudolf Steiner. It is the lecture notes by participants of 31 lectures, early lectures, entitled Foundations of Esotericism, translated by Vera and Judith Compton Burnett. This is Lecture 12, given in Berlin on the 7th of October, 1905. When the physical body is discussed, most people have a very unclear, confused idea of what it actually is. In point of fact, what we have before us is not just the physical body, but a combination of the physical body with higher forces. A piece of rock crystal is also physical, but in its very nature this is something quite different from the human eye, EYE, or heart, which are also physical. The eye and heart are parts of the physical body, but they are intermixed with man's higher members, and through this something is brought about which is completely different from other aspects of the physical. In water we find oxygen and hydrogen, but they look quite different from when we see them separated. Then we are aware of their difference. In water we have before us a mixture of both. What meets us in the physical body of man is also a mixture, comprised of the physical, etheric, and astral bodies. The physical human eye is similar to a camera, for, as with the camera, there appears within it a picture of the surrounding world. Only when one takes away from the physical eye everything that one cannot find in the camera does one discover the specific nature of the physical eye. So, too, one must take away from the entire physical body everything that is not purely physical. Only then does one have what in occultism is called the physical body. In itself it can neither live, think, nor feel. There, then, remains a very wisely ordered, extremely complicated automaton, a purely physical apparatus. This alone was all there was of human existence at the old Saturn stage. At that time the eyes were present only as little cameras. What was produced as a picture of the surrounding world came to the consciousness of a deva being. In the middle of the Saturn evolution, the so-called asuras, the archai, were sufficiently advanced to make use of the apparatus. At that time they were at the human stage. They made use of the automata and the pictures they produced. The asuras themselves were not within the apparatus, but outside, and only made use of the pictures as we make use of photographic apparatus in order to take pictures of a landscape. Thus the physical body of man was at that time an architectural structure of a physical apparatus operated from outside. This is the first stage of human existence. The second stage of development was the permeation of this physical apparatus with the etheric body. It then became a living organism. That also found expression in the configuration of the body. The automaton was built up out of a quite firm, undifferentiated mass, similar to what today is a jelly-like substance, like a soft crystal. In the second round of evolution in the old sun existence, the physical automaton was imbued with the etheric body. In this round, the solar plexus developed. It is so called because still today only rudiments of the organ are present. It fashions a nervous system into the physical apparatus. In the case of the plant, something similar is present. That is the second stage. But these stages are not final. Evolution gradually progresses. Even today the solar plexus is an active agent in certain animals which have not developed a spinal cord. All animals without backbones are single forms from left-behind stages of what was laid down earlier. It was only on the earth that man cast out from himself the animals with backbones. In earlier times his organism was still somewhat similar to that of the crab at the present day. Man has progressed beyond that earlier stage, whereas the crab has remained stationary. It is an astonishing fact that the whole inner formation of the crab has a certain similarity to the human brain. There is actually a similarity between the internal formation of the crab and the human brain. Like the human brain, the crab, too, is enclosed in a hard shell. After man had developed a spine and had metamorphosed the upper vertebra, he cast off the hard shell. The crab has not developed further. It has adapted itself to its environment by means of a hard shell that it needed to have, and which serves the same purpose as does the protective covering of the whole body in man. The third stage is that in which the whole is transformed by the astral body working within it. This organic transformation is connected with the development of the heart and the circulation of the blood. The heart of the fish has remained stationary at a halfway stage. The development of the heart is proportionate to the degree in which there is an increase in the inner warmth of the body. This signifies nothing other than a drawing of the astral into the body. The spinal cord with the brain is the organ of the ego, the I capital. This is surrounded by the threefold protective sheath of the astral, etheric, and physical bodies. After the organ, spinal cord, and brain of the ego had been prepared, the ego laid itself in the bed made ready for it, and the spinal cord and brain appear as organs in the service of the ego. The fourfold man is put together in this way. It is the Pythagorean square. Number 1, the spinal cord and brain are the organ of the ego or I. Number 2, the warm blood in the heart are the organ of kama, astral body. Number 3, the solar plexus is the organ of the etheric body. Number 4, the actual physical body is the complicated physical apparatus. Thus has the fourfold being of man been built up. In occultism, what we have now described is again called a spiral, verbal, something that builds from outside inward and unites with what builds up from within. Physical body, etheric and astral bodies have built up the human being. Then the ego, the I, makes itself felt, and this builds from within outward. These are the four constituents of man. Here we find in the outer an imprint of the fourfold man. All further development is of such a nature that the human being, starting from this point of the ego, consciously experiences what previously he went through unconsciously. Today, in order to realize that this is so, one must in the first place investigate what took place when our ego, our I, was being developed. In order to do this, we must, as it were, take up our position under a certain organ. This is most aptly expressed in the Buddha legend. It says in the legend that Buddha remained seated under the Bodhi tree until the attained illumination, in order to rise to higher stages, to nirvana. For this, Buddha had to place himself under the brain, under the organ of consciousness. That means the paths he had previously traversed unconsciously, he had to traverse again consciously. Under the large brain there lies, more toward the back of the head, the small tree-shaped brain, the cerebellum. Under this brain Buddha placed himself. The cerebellum is the Bodhi tree. This shows how what is said in such profound legends is actually taken from human evolution. Everything that now is known only by means of anatomy was at that time known in quite another way. The occult investigator made his researches with the help of the Kundalini light. The pupil was prepared for this in the following way. He came to a master. If the latter found him trustworthy, he received as instruction, not actually a teaching. Today it has become different. Today man must find his way by means of intellect and concepts. And so the master spoke somewhat as follows, quote, "Every day for about 6 weeks, you must spend several hours in meditation and give yourself up to some sentence of eternal value, completely sinking yourself into it." Close quote. At present man cannot do this because life in modern civilization makes too many demands on him. At that time the pupil meditated 6 to 10 hours daily. He cannot do this nowadays without withdrawing from the whole life around him. At that time, however, the pupil required hardly any time for external needs. He found his nourishment in outer nature. He therefore made use of his time for meditation, perhaps uninterruptedly for 10 hours. By this means he very soon progressed so far that he brought his body, which at that time was less dense, into such a condition that the Kundalini light was awakened within him. This is for the inner being what sunlight is for the outer world. We do not actually see external objects, but reflected sunlight. The moment when, with the help of the Kundalini light, we can illuminate the soul, it becomes as visible as an external object shone upon by the sun. So for the yoga pupil, the whole inner body gradually became illuminated. All ancient anatomies were seen from within through inner illumination. Thus the Indian monks who clothed their experiences in legends spoke of what they had perceived through the Kundalini light. Now we must ask ourselves how the different parts of the human body are worked upon. In regard to what belongs to the brain and spinal cord, man first works consciously on the physical plane through the human ego. Bracket, there's a gap in the text, close bracket. He has at present no influence on anything else. For instance, he has no influence on the circulation of the blood. Such things are developed by degrees. Here other beings cooperate, deva beings, so that all creatures having a blood circulation are dependent on deva forces for its regulation. The astral body is permeated and worked upon by different deva forces. The lowest work on the astral body. Higher forces work on the etheric body, and still higher devas on the physical body, the most perfected body possessed by man. The astral body is strikingly less perfect than the physical body. The physical heart is indeed very clever. The stupid one is the astral body that directs into the heart all kinds of heart poisons. The most perfect part of man is the physical body. Less perfect is the etheric body, and still less perfect is the astral body. What is only in its beginnings the baby, in quotes, in man, is the ego organization. This is the fourfold man, which contains the ego as the temple contains the statue of a god. The whole development of human culture is nothing other than the working of the ego, the I, into the astral body, the education of the astral body. Filled with desires, impulses, and passions, the human being enters into life. And so far as he masters these impulses, desires, and passions, he works with his I, his ego, on the astral body. When the sixth root race, the sixth major epoch, has reached its conclusion, the I, the ego, will have completely worked into the astral body. Until then, the astral body will continue to be dependent on the support of the deva forces. For as long as the I, the ego, has not permeated the entire astral body, so long must the deva forces support the work. The second stage of development, which follows the stage of his cultural development, is his development as an esoteric student. The human being works with his I, his ego, into the etheric body. Through this, the deva forces are gradually released by the work of his own I. Then he also gradually begins to see into himself. We can now ask, what is the significance of the astral body? For what purpose does man have an astral body? It is to give him the possibility, by way of his desires, to do what otherwise he would not have done, and to betake himself to the physical plane. For before man can acquire objective knowledge on the physical plane, he must direct to it his wishes and desires. Without these, he would have been unable to develop an objective observation of the world or a sense of duty and morality. Only after a gradual transformation of his desires can these be changed into duties and ideals. Man can only pursue this path by means of the driving, organizing power of the astral body. The etheric body is the bearer of thoughts. What is thought within man is etheric outside, just as what is desire within him is astral outside. But it is only when pure thinking begins that etheric substance is radiated into the astral impulses. As long as thinking is not yet pure thinking, we have astral substance surrounding the etheric form. So thought forms, as they are called, are made out of a kernel of etheric substance surrounded by astral substance. Along the paths of the nerves stream the so-called abstract thoughts, which, however, are in reality the most concrete, for they are etheric forces. As soon as man even begins to think, he is already working with his I, his ego, on his etheric body. When a man dies, it becomes clear that the physical body has nothing to do with the I, the ego. Every connection between the physical body and the I is broken off after death. Previously, this connection took place indirectly through the other bodies. When these are no longer there, the corpse has no further relation to the I. Then the outer deva forces receive it, and it is again absorbed into the physical environment. The word verwesen, to decay, does not mean only a passing away, but a return to the Wesen, being, out of which the body came forth. This is what may be said in respect of the physical body. The Dutch word lichaam does not mean leichnam, corpse, but the physical body which has to be carried about. The etheric body is to a great extent in a similar situation to the physical body. It is taken up in the same way by the devas, and then again dissolved into general circulation. But there remains from the etheric body that part of it that the human being himself has worked into, and this does not dissolve. It is this which later, at the time of reincarnation, forms a central point around which what is to be added is crystallized. This small part of the etheric body remains present in the case of everyone. In the same way, there remains from the astral body as much of it as the human being has worked into. Only during the last third of the sixth root race will the complete astral body be retained by everyone of normal development. Thus, development begins by man's working consciously on his astral body. The task of the cella, the occult pupil, consists further in the transformation of his etheric body. The stage of cellahood is completed when, after death, the entire etheric body remains intact. The sojourn in Devachan is necessary in order to make possible a renewal of the forces of the etheric body. The small portion of the etheric body, which, to begin with, man carries into Devachan, can grow into the complete etheric body, because the necessary conditions are created there. This makes comprehensible the varying length of the sojourn in Devachan. When the human being stands at the beginning of his development, and has transformed but very little of his etheric body, he can only remain in Devachan for quite a short time. The part of the etheric body that is lacking must be replaced for him by the external devas. When he develops further, he sojourns for a progressively longer time in Devachan. Thus the time that he spends there increases in proportion to his own development. People, however, who are more advanced sometimes reincarnate earlier for other reasons, for instance, because they are needed in the world. When the cella dies, the entire etheric body is present. Thus, at this stage, the cella can renounce Devachan, because the etheric body has been completely worked through. Then, after quite a short time, rebirth takes place. He waits at first in the astral world, as in a place of transition, until he receives a definite mission from his master. Then he can again take possession of his etheric body in order to reincarnate once more. Until this stage is reached, a duality is necessary for evolution. That is, that which man is unable to develop inwardly for himself is built into him from outside. Help must be brought to him from without. Thus in Devachan, the etheric body is once more made complete by external deva powers. The physical plane and Devachan are polar opposites. Between them lies Kamaloka, a place of transition, a transitional stage, an intermediary condition that causes the human being to be connected with what he has worked into, his astral body. The astral body leads man on to the physical plane, where he directs his attention outward. Here desires are cultivated by contact with external things. When a person dies, his craving for outer objects does not immediately cease, although he no longer has organs bringing him into connection with them. The desire remains, but the organs are lacking. In Kamaloka, he must break himself from this longing for the outer world. Kamaloka does not actually belong to normal development. It is only a stage where habits must be relinquished. It is because man can no longer satisfy his wishes, because he no longer has organs for the physical world, that Kamaloka comes about. When someone commits suicide, he has identified his I, his ego, with the physical body. For this reason, the longing for the physical body is all the more intense. It seems to him that he is like a hollow tree, like someone who has lost his interior. He then has a continual thirst for himself. When a man is put to death by violence, he is in a similar situation. In the case of someone who meets a violent death, he continues seeking for his physical body until the time when he would otherwise have died. This seeking can bring about harmful reactions. In such a case, it can happen that a man who meets his end by violence is filled with a terrible rage against those who have caused his death. Then in the murdered man, the blow is changed into a counter-blow. Thus, from the astral world, the souls of Russians executed for political reasons fought against their own countrymen on the side of the Japanese. This happened in the Russo-Japanese War. It is, however, not a general rule. The end of Lecture 12. You are listening to RudolfSteinerAudio.com. As well, you can hear these podcasts at RudolfSteiner.podbean.com. Please consider becoming a patron. There are also two publishing houses, SteinerBooks.org in America and RudolfSteinerPress.com in England, which are the sole publishers of Steiner into English and have given me permission to do these recordings. Please consider patronizing them as well. This is a reading of Collected Works, Volume 93a by Rudolf Steiner. It's the participants' notes to 31 lectures from the early years entitled Foundations of Esotericism. This is Lecture 13, given in Berlin on the 8th of October, 1905, translated by Vera and Judith Compton Burnett. The present lecture is inserted into this course to shed light on many things spoken of in the other lectures. It will deal with the activity and the nature of the devas. At the present time, it is very difficult to speak about the gods or devas, because even those people who still have a positive attitude toward religion and still believe in the gods no longer have any living relationship to divine spiritual beings. This living relationship to the gods, to beings, that is to say, who are exalted far above human beings, has disappeared in the course of the age of materialism, especially during the materialistic age, which developed from the turning point of the 15th and 16th centuries on into our own time. This living connection with the gods has been lost. It makes little difference whether a person takes his stand on Darwinian materialism, or whether he speaks about the gods in a more or less religious sense. It is much more to the point to become livingly aware that we ourselves have ascended from lower stages of existence and have yet to ascend to higher stages. We must realize that we have a relationship both with what is below and what is above. Instruction about the gods was first systematized by Dionysius the Areopagite, the pupil of the Apostle Paul. It was, however, not written down until the 6th century. This is why scholars deny the existence of Dionysius the Areopagite and speak about the writings of the pseudo-Dionysius, as though it was in the 6th century that old traditions were first put together. The truth of the matter can only be substantiated by reading in the Akashic Chronicle. The Akashic Chronicle does, however, teach that Dionysius actually lived in Athens, that he was initiated by Paul and was commissioned by him to lay the foundation of the teaching about the higher spiritual beings and to impart this knowledge to special initiates. At that time, certain lofty teachings were never written down, but only communicated as tradition by word of mouth. The teaching about the gods was also given in this way by Dionysius to his pupils, who then passed it on further. These pupils in direct succession were intentionally called Dionysius, so that the last of these who wrote down this teaching was one of those who was given this name. This teaching about the gods, as given by Dionysius, encompasses 3 times 3 ranks of divine beings. The 3 highest are seraphim, cherubim, thrones, the next degree dominions, mights, powers, the 3rd degree primal beginnings, archangels, and angels. In the Bible, the words, quote, "in the beginning," close quote, often occur. They refer to the primal beginnings, or archai. Quote, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth," close quote. This means the God of the beginnings, who stands at this stage, created heaven and earth. It was one of the archai belonging to the 3rd rank of the hierarchies. Above the seraphim stand divine beings whose nature is so exalted that the human power of understanding is not able to comprehend them. After the 3rd rank follows the 4th hierarchy, man as the 10th in the entire sequence. The names of the hierarchies do not refer to individuals, but to certain stages of consciousness of the great universe, and the beings move from one stage to another. Eliphas Levi perceived this clearly and laid stress on the fact that with these names one has to do with stages of development, with hierarchies. The basis of the organization of the Church goes back also to the same Dionysius who formulated the teaching about the gods. The Church hierarchy was to be an outer image of the inner hierarchy of the world. This grandiose thought could only have been carried through if the time had been ripe for an understanding of all this in its true form. Dionysius had bequeathed to his pupils such a teaching in regard to the Church, so that, could it have been realized, a powerful and magnificent organization would have come into being. At that time the attempt was made to promulgate the teachings in such a way that the thread was never broken from one teacher to the next, who then also carried on the name. It is therefore not so astonishing that as late as the 6th century, a Dionysius committed the teachings to writing. These teachings, however, could not find general understanding, because for this humanity was not yet ripe. They therefore remain as a kind of testament. The further we go back, the more living are the concepts man had about beings standing above humanity. Now, let us develop certain concepts as to how the human being, the ordinary person in the average cultural environment of our time, meets the gods. After death, the human being first goes through kamaloka, the condition in which he gradually gets rid of the habits of earthly life and frees himself from his desires. It is actually only in its first stages that the sojourn in kamaloka is often frightening and terrible. Later, man goes through that period of kamaloka when he has to purify himself from the more delicate connections with the earthly world. This sojourn in kamaloka is not only important for the person in question. As we shall see, the activity of human beings in the higher conditions of kamaloka can also be made use of in the world outside them. After kamaloka, man enters into the devakan condition, where, using the faculties he has won for himself, he works over everything which is necessary in order to build up a new etheric body. On the arupa plane of devakan, he has to deposit everything that he gained by his experiences on the physical plane. This is why in esotericism the Greek priests called the soul a bee, the arupa plane a beehive, and the physical plane the flowering meadow. There is, however, no need for man to be inactive in the higher regions. During the time he is passing through kamaloka and the lower devakanic planes, it might appear that he has nothing else to do than to allow what he began earlier to come to fruition. But man is not inactive there. What he experiences in these conditions is significant for the whole world. The new incarnation of the human being only has a purpose if he meets conditions which are totally different from the earlier ones. In normal circumstances, he returns when the whole situation is so different that what he finds around him is entirely new. so that what he adds to his previous achievement is entirely new. This happens in that period of cosmic time when the sun has progressed from one constellation of the zodiac to the next. For instance, about 800 BC, the sun in spring entered the constellation of the Ram, or Lamb, and this continued until 1800 AD. Now, at the beginning of spring, it stands in the constellation of the Fishes. 2,600 years elapse before the sun passes from one constellation of the zodiac to the next. During this time, conditions undergo a fundamental change. Reincarnation is connected with these epochs, during which the human being is usually incarnated once as a masculine and once as a feminine individuality. In any particular incarnation, one is in fact only half a human being. A masculine and a feminine incarnation belong together. Owing to the entirely different physical conditions on the earth, a new incarnation is not without purpose. If, for example, someone was incarnated at the time of Homer in the sign of the ram or lamb, Jason, the golden fleece, he would have experienced something quite different from what he would experience now. These incarnations taken by themselves might appear to be part of a completely mechanical process. There is, however, nothing outward that is not brought about from within. One must accustom oneself to speak everywhere of a real spirit, to seek for it, and to perceive what is actually happening. When one looks at the flora and fauna of Europe in our epoch, one has to differentiate three zones: a western, a central, and an eastern zone. The eastern zone coincides with the Slavonic peoples, the central with the Germanic, and the western with the Latin peoples. The materialist believes that human beings have adapted themselves to their circumstances, but this is not so. The different peoples have themselves created their physical conditions. The folk spirit works first on the earth, on the plants and the animals into which he enters. The Western European territory has been prepared by the Latin peoples, the Central European by the Germanic, the Eastern European by the Slavonic peoples. Thus human beings first build themselves the house in which they later reside. Now let us ask, when does man work upon the external configuration of the earth? As with everything else in the earthly world, destiny too is prepared by man for himself, and this is partially the case here. In Kamaloka, man is actually engaged in collaborating with work on the animal kingdom, in the transformation of the species. The force which brings this about is called, by natural scientists, in quotes, adaptation. Everything, however, that is called adaptation conceals human activity on the other side of existence. Everything which appears as metamorphosis in the animal kingdom, influencing and altering animal instincts so that animals undergo transformation, takes place through human beings in Kamaloka who are preparing for their next incarnation. There, man works on his own house in preparation for his next life. In Kamaloka, man works on the fauna, and in Devakan, on the flora. The transformation of the plant world is the result of Devakanic forces, and the physical world, which also changes, the outer conditions of nature, are influenced from the Arupa plane, higher Devakan. There man is a co-worker on the rocks, on the mineral kingdom of the earth. It is certainly necessary to have some measure of occult powers in order to make such observations in the appropriate place. It is not by chance that miners of metals and minerals, not coal, in particular make such observations underground. Novalis' famous occult faculties are connected with the fact that he was a mining engineer. When one considers that in the supersensible regions man is developing certain forces, although while there he has not as yet his full consciousness, one understands that these forces are guided by higher beings, by the devas. We distinguish different stages of devas: astral, rupa mental, and arupa mental, astral devas have as their lowest member the astral body, just as we have the physical body. Like man, the astral deva consists of 7 members. He possesses, therefore, as the 7th, yet another member which is higher than Atma. The devas are all constituted according to the same principles as man. As development progresses to higher planes, a being gains conscious mastery over the corresponding lower planes. On the physical plane today, man is only master of the mineral kingdom. There he can construct something himself, but he cannot yet construct a plant or an animal. In the mineral kingdom, he has the component parts clearly before him. On the next stage, he consciously brings forth the plants, 5th round, and then the animals, 6th round, and, finally, he consciously brings forth himself in the 7th round. The beings whom we call devas can do much more than human beings of the 7th round. They can make use of regions that lie below their own world. They can, for a particular purpose, form for a short time the body that they need. Thus an astral deva, if he should so wish, can incarnate physically at a definite time. We can only form definite ideas about the devas when we take our start from human activity. Up to a certain degree, man is free, able to do as he pleases. People, however, do not work harmoniously together, and therefore the various forces which proceed from human beings must be brought into harmony. What people do must have a general effect, and this must be made to serve a useful purpose in the world. The beings who bring this about are the devas. They also regulate collective karma. As soon as people unite in a common purpose, they have a collective karma which binds them together and leads them on their way, weaving a common karmic thread. Thus in Russia there existed the sect of the Dukhobers, warriors of the spirit, who were deeply religious. In naive but in very beautiful form they possessed the teachings of theosophy. These people were banished and apparently no longer had any visible influence. Materialists will say, quote, "What purpose could this have served?" Close quote. The Dukhobors perished. Readers aside, Dukhobors, I'm attempting that pronunciation, is spelled D-U-K-H-O-B-O-R-S, Dukhobors. End of readers aside. But all those who were united in this sect will, in their next incarnation, be united by a common tie, in order, later, to pour into humanity what they have learned. In such a way, groups which have come together work on humanity in subsequent incarnations. The idea that was embodied in their lives then flows out again into the world. One finds the same idea in a deeper form in another such group. Thus there existed, for instance, in the Middle Ages, the sect of the Manichaeans. The secret of the Manichaeans was that they realized that in the future there would be 2 groups of human beings, the good and the bad. In the 5th round there will no longer be a mineral kingdom, but instead a kingdom of evil. The Manichaeans knew this. They therefore made it their task already then, so to educate people, that later they might become educators of the evil human beings. Again and again a deeper profundity is seen in the sect of the Manichaeans. We have to distinguish the separate wills of individual human beings from the powers which stand behind them in order to unite these individual wills into a common will. In this way, we have a collective karma. The Rosicrucians spoke about beings who are connected with groups of people. The physical body belongs to the single human being. The astral body, on the other hand, already belongs to a group. In one part of his astral body, man is connected with a group soul. What he cannot yet do for himself is today done for him by a deva. They are still working on man's astral body. The devas cooperate even more strongly in what man achieves today through work on his etheric body. We have seen that in a part of Kamaloka the human being's forces are used in the service of the animal kingdom, but they are guided by the devas. Thence, man is progressing ever further on his way to Devachan. A special class of devas are the planetary spirits, the Dhyan Chohanic beings, who earlier reached the stage which human beings will only attain much later. They stand at the stage that will only be reached by man in the 6th and 7th rounds. A planetary spirit is engaged with others in creative work on certain aspects of planetary evolution. At present, man is active on the physical, astral, and devachanic planes. Everything is activity. Now, what significance have the planetary spirits for man in any particular situation? The activity which is at present being carried out by man was carried out by the planetary spirits during previous stages of evolution, during previous planetary conditions. What they then absorbed, they now have within them as wisdom. This enables them to become the teachers of the next planetary epoch. Those devas who were actively engaged in the formation of the earth were not yet able to recognize the underlying laws. This was only possible for beings at the higher stage of wisdom. Above the stage of wisdom is the stage of will, of manifested activity. The spirits of wisdom, Kuryatetes, and the spirits of will, thrones, are the actual leaders of planetary evolution. At the time when man was still an astral being, before the Lemurian age, the devas worked within him and built into him in advance what came forth from him later. Before the Lemurian age, there rose up in the inner being of man a picture of his environment. Feelings of sympathy and antipathy also arose in picture form within him. All this was brought about by the devas. At that time he was governed by the regency of the devas. Later he assumed in some measure the regency over himself, becoming a subordinate member in the service of the devas. Now he is to some extent God-forsaken. Only in the part that is not God-forsaken do the devas still work within him. The Chela consciously brings to life within him that world which man in the pre-Lemurian age had learned to know in pictures. Then desires and passions approached man in the form of auric pictures, in which lived the thoughts of the devas. But it was all in deep twilight consciousness. Now, after all this has been lost, man had to struggle to attain conscious seeing of an external world. The further development of Chela-ship consists in gaining this also incomplete awareness. He retains full consciousness throughout. The medium, that is to say, the practice of mediumship, is a relapse into an earlier age. What the human being experiences on the physical plane is the skeleton of his creative activity, the foundation for the following periods of evolution. Through his contact with the outer world, faculties are formed within him, according to which later planetary activity is ordered, after man himself will have become a planetary spirit. In our speech, we create the foundation for later planetary conditions. What we speak today will actually be present there as foundation, just as the rocks and stones form the foundation of the earth. In one sphere, the experiences pass through a process of involution, so that in another sphere they may be able to proceed through evolution. And individuality is divine insofar as he is able to breathe out again what he has taken in. The devas become devas as soon as they are able to give back again what they have previously absorbed. It is a primeval wisdom that was absorbed earlier and is now being given back. It is, in quotes, theosophy, inasmuch as the gods themselves were once the teachers of mankind. Karma is the law, The Deva is the one who brings the law into application. The angel of the rotation of time brings about the application of the law governing groups of human beings. The single person in a group acts instinctively. The Deva guides the folk soul. He is, in fact, the folk soul. The folk soul is no abstraction, but a living spirit. The end of Lecture 13. You are listening to RudolfSteinerAudio.com. As well, these podcasts can be heard at RudolfSteiner.podbean.com. Please consider becoming a patron. Also, there are two publishing houses, SteinerBooks.org in America and RudolfSteinerPress.com in England, which are the sole publishers of Steiner into English and have given me permission to do these recordings. Please consider patronizing them as well. This is a reading of Collected Works, Volume 93a by Rudolf Steiner. It is 31 lectures, notes by participants, entitled Foundations of Esotericism, and it is translated by Vera and Judith Compton Burnett. This is Lecture 14, given in Berlin on the 9th of October, 1905. We will speak today about man's sojourn in Devachan, between two incarnations. Again and again we must make clear to ourselves that this sojourn in Devachan is no other place than where we ourselves are now, in physical life. For all three worlds, Devachan, the astral, and the physical, are nothing other than three interpenetrating worlds. If we think of the world of electric forces before electricity had been discovered, we can form the most correct idea of Devachan. There was a time when all this was contained in the physical world only. It was then an occult world. Everything that is occult has, at some time, to be discovered. The difference between life in Devachan and that in the physical world is that man in his present epoch is endowed with organs enabling him to perceive the physical world, but not with organs that enable him to behold the phenomena of Devachan. Let us imagine ourselves in the soul of someone living between two incarnations. He has given over his physical body to the forces of the earth, and relinquished his etheric body to the life forces. Furthermore, he has given back that part of his astral body into which he himself has not worked. He then finds himself in Devachan. As personal possession, he no longer has what the gods had worked into his etheric and astral bodies. All this has been cast aside. He possesses now only what he himself has achieved in the course of many lives. In Devachan, this remains his own. All that man has done in the physical world serves the purpose of making him more and more conscious in Devachan. Let us take the relationship of one person to another. It can be said that this is simply a natural one. For instance, the relationship between brothers and sisters who have been brought together through natural circumstances. It is, however, only partially natural, for moral and intellectual factors are continually playing in. Through his karma, man is born into a particular family, but not everything is conditioned by karma. We have, in the case of the animals, the natural relationship into which nothing else is intermixed. In the case of human beings, there is always, through karma, a moral relationship also. The relationship between two people can, however, also exist without this being conditioned by nature. For instance, a bond of intimate friendship can arise between two people in spite of outer hindrances. As a rather extreme case, let us assume that they were at first mutually somewhat unsympathetic toward one another, and that they found the way to each other on a purely intellectual and moral basis, soul to soul. Let us contrast this with the natural relationship between members of a family. With the relationship of soul to soul, we have a powerful means of developing devachanic organs. In no way can devachanic organs be more easily developed at present than by such relationships. Such a relationship is unconsciously a devachanic one. In his present life, what a person develops in the way of soul faculty through friendship of a purely soul nature, in Devachan, is wisdom, the possibility of experiencing the spiritual in action. To the extent to which someone enters livingly into such connections, he is well prepared for Devachan. If he is unable to form such relationships, he is unprepared. For just as color escapes a blind man, so does soul experience escape him. To the degree to which man fosters purely soul relationships, do organs of vision for Devachan develop in him. So that it is true to say, whoever lives and moves here in the life of the Spirit will, over there, perceive just as much of the spiritual as he has gained here through his activity. Hence the immeasurable importance of life on the physical plane. In human evolution, no other means of awakening the organs for Devachan exists other than spiritual activity on the physical plane. All this is creative and comes back to us as devachanic sense organs for the devachanic world. As preparation, there is nothing better than to have a purely soul relationship with other human beings, a relationship whose origin is in no way based upon natural connections, blood ties. This is why people should be brought together into groups, in order to unite on a purely spiritual basis. It is the will of the Masters to pour life in this way into the stream of humanity. What takes place with the right attitude of mind signifies for all the members of the group the opening of a spiritual eye, EYE, in Devachan. There, one will then see everything which is on the same level as what one had united oneself with here. If here on the physical plane one has attached oneself to a spiritual endeavor, this actually is among those things which retain their existence after death. Such things belong just as much to the dead as to the one who has survived him. He who has passed over remains in the same connection with the one still on earth, and is indeed even more intensely conscious of this spiritual relationship. Thus, one educates oneself for Devachan. The souls of the dead remain in connection with those who were dear to them. The earlier relationships become causes which have their effects in Devachan. This is why the Devachanic world is called the world of effects, and the physical world the world of causes. In no other way can man build his higher organs than by implanting the seeds for these organs on the physical plane. For this purpose man is transferred to earthly existence. The much-quoted phrase, quote, "to overcome separate existence," close quote, will now become clear to us. Before we descended to physical existence, we lived with the content of our astral body, which was brought about by a deva. In earlier times, sympathy and antipathy in the human being were stimulated by the devas. He himself was not responsible. Then at the next stage man said to himself, "Now I have entered into the physical world as a being who must find his own way. Formerly, I was not able to speak the word I capital. Now I have become, for the first time, a separate entity. Previously I was indeed a separate entity, but also a member of a devachanic being. On the physical plane, I am a separate entity for myself, an ego, an I, because I am enclosed in a physical body." The higher bodies flow into one another. For instance, Atma is in truth a oneness for the whole of humanity, like an atmosphere shared in common. Nevertheless, the Atma of the single human being is to be understood as if each one were to cut a piece for himself out of the common karma, so that, as it were, incisions are made in it. But the separateness must be overcome. This we do when we form human attachments of a purely soul nature. By so doing, we do away with the separateness and recognize the unity of Atma in everything. By establishing such human relationships, I awaken sympathy within me. I then undertake the task of selflessly fitting myself into the world plan. Through this, the divine is awakened in man. That is why we look out into the world. Today we are surrounded by physical reality, by sun, moon, and stars. What man had around him in the old moon existence, he has today within himself. The forces of the moon now live within him. Had man not existed on the old moon, he would not have possessed these forces. This is why in Egyptian esoteric centers, the occult teaching called the moon Isis, the goddess of fertility. Isis is the soul of the moon, the precursor of the earth. Then all the forces which now live in plants and animals, for the purpose of reproduction, lived in the environment. Just as fire, chemical ether, magnetism, and so on are now around us and surround the earth, so the moon was surrounded by those forces which enabled man, animal, and plant to propagate. The forces which at present surround the earth will, in the future, play an individualized role in the human being. What now constitutes the relationship between man and woman was on the old moon external physical activity, such as volcanic eruptions are today. These forces surrounded man during the old moon existence, and he drew them in through his moon senses in order to evolve them now. What man developed on the old moon through involution emerged on earth as evolution. What the human being developed after the Lemurian age as the sexual forces is due to Isis, the soul of the moon, which now lives on further in the human being. Here we have the relationship between the human being and the present moon. The moon has left its soul to man and has itself become a mere slag heap. While we are gaining experiences on the earth, we are gathering the forces which during the next planetary evolution will become our own being. Our present experiences in Devachan are the preparatory stages for future epochs. Just as man today looks up to the moon and says, quote, "You have given us the forces of reproduction," close quote, so in the future he will look up to a moon that has arisen out of our present physical earth, and as a soulless body of slag will circle round the future Jupiter. On future Jupiter, man will develop new forces, which today on the earth he takes into himself as light and warmth and all physical sense perceptions. Later he will ray out everything which he had previously perceived through the senses. Whatever he had taken in through his soul will then be reality. So, the theosophical conception does not lead us to underrate the world on the physical plane, but to understand that we must draw out of the physical plane what we need to have, experiences which will later radiate outward. The warmth of the earth, the rays of the sun, which now stream toward us, will later stream out from us. Just as at the present time the sexual forces emanate from us, so it will be with these new forces. Now let us make clear to ourselves the significance of the Devachan conditions which follow one another. At first, Devachan is only short, but ever more and more spiritual organs are being formed in the mental body, until at last, when his understanding has embraced the wisdom of the earth, man will have completely fashioned the organs of the Devachanic body. This will come about for the whole of mankind when all the world rounds are completed. Then everything will have become human wisdom. Warmth and light will then have become wisdom. Between the earth, Manvantara, and the following planetary evolution, man lives in pralaya. Outwardly there is nothing whatever. but all the forces which man has drawn forth from the earth are within him. In such a life period, the outer turns inward. Everything is then present as seed, and its life is carried over to the next Manvantara. Broadly speaking, this is a similar condition to that in which we, in the moment of retrospect, forget all that is around us, and only remember our experiences in order to preserve them in memory, and later make use of them. So in Pralaya, mankind as a whole remembers all experiences in order to put them to use once more. There are always such intermediate conditions, which, as it were, consist of memories, and so the devaconic state is also an intermediate one. The initiate already now sees before him those facts which man only gradually has around him in devachan. It is an intermediate condition. All similar conditions are of an intermediate nature. The initiate describes the world as it is on the other side, in devachan, in the intermediate state. When he gets beyond devachan and reaches a still higher condition, he again describes an intermediate state. The first stage of initiation consists in the pupil learning to penetrate through the veil of the external world and to look at the world from the other side. The initiate is homeless here on the earth. He must build himself a home on the other side. When the disciples were with Jesus, quote, on the mountain, close quote, they were led into the devaconic world, beyond space and time. They built themselves a tabernacle, in quotes, a home. This is the first stage of initiation. At the second stage of initiation, something similar occurs, but on a higher level. At this stage, the initiate has a state of consciousness corresponding to the intermediate period between two conditions of form, globes, a state of pralaya that comes about when everything is achieved that can be achieved in the physical condition of form, and the earth is metamorphosed into a so-called astral condition of form, globe. The third stage of initiate consciousness is that which corresponds to the intermediate state between two rounds, from the old arupa globe of the previous round to the new arupa globe of the following round. The initiate is in the pralaya between two rounds when he raises himself into the third stage. He is then an initiate of the third degree. So we can now understand why Jesus had to reach the third stage before he could place his body at the service of Christ. Christ stands above all the spirits who live in the rounds. The initiate who had raised himself above the rounds could place his body at the service of Christ. The human ego consciousness was to be purified and healed through Christianity. Christ had to raise and purify the self-centered ego, the self-centered I, capital, so that when it has reached self-consciousness, it may die selflessly. This he could only do in a body which had become one with, bracket, there's a gap in the text, close bracket. Thus, only an initiate of the third grade could sacrifice his body for the Christ. In our time, it is extraordinarily difficult to attain to a complete awareness of these lofty conditions. The profoundly wise Subaro had his own knowledge. He describes 3 such stages of discipleship. We see the moon as the lifeless residue of ourselves, and we ourselves have in us the forces which once gave the moon its life. That is also the reason for the special sentimental mood in all poets who sing the praises of the moon. All poetical feelings are faint echoes of living occult streams deeply hidden in man. A being can, however, become entangled in what should actually remain behind as slag. Something must remain behind from the earth that is destined to become later what the moon is today. This must be overcome by man. But someone can have a liking for such things, and so unites himself with them. A person who is deeply bound up with what is purely of the senses, of the lower instincts, connects himself ever more strongly with what should become slag. This will come about when the number 666 is fulfilled, the number of the beast. Then comes the moment when the earth must draw away from further planetary evolution. If, however, the human being has connected himself too strongly with the forces of the senses, which should now detach themselves, if he is related to them, and has not found a way to attach himself to what is to pass over to the next globe, he will depart with the slag, and become an inhabitant of this body of slag, in the same way as other beings are now inhabitants of the present moon. Here we have the concept of the 8th sphere. Mankind must go through 7 spheres. The 7 planetary evolutions correspond to the 7 bodies. Old Saturn corresponds to the physical body. Old Sun corresponds to the etheric body. Old Moon corresponds to the astral body. The Earth corresponds to the I, the ego. Future Jupiter corresponds to Manas. Future Venus corresponds to Buddhi. Vulcan corresponds to Atma. Beside these there is an 8th sphere, to which everything goes that cannot make any connection with this continuous evolution. This already forms itself as predisposition in the devaconic state. When a human being uses the life on earth only to amass what is of service to himself alone, only to experience an intensification of his own egotistical self, this leads in Devachan into the condition of avicii. A person who cannot escape from his own separateness goes into avicii. All these avicii individuals will eventually become inhabitants of the 8th sphere. The other human beings will be inhabitants of the continuing chain of evolution. It is from this concept that religions have formulated the doctrine of hell. When man returns from Devachan, the astral, etheric, and physical forces arrange themselves around him according to 12 forces of karma, which in Indian esotericism are called nidanas. They are as follows. Number 1, avidya, ignorance. Number 2, sanskara, the organizing tendencies. Number 3, vijnana, consciousness. Number 4, nama-rupa, name and form. Number 5, shadayadana, what the intellect makes of things. Number 6, sparsha, contact with existence. Number 7, vedana, feeling. Number 8, trishna, thirst for existence. Number 9, upadana, a sense of comfort in existence. Number 10, bhava, birth. Number 11, djati, the urge toward birth. Number 12, djara marana, what frees from earthly existence. In the next lecture we shall study these important aspects of karma in more detail. The end of Lecture 14. You are listening to RudolfSteinerAudio.com. As well, these podcasts can be heard at RudolfSteiner.podbean.com. Please consider becoming a patron. As well, there are 2 publishing houses, SteinerBooks.org in America and RudolfSteinerPress.com in England, which are the sole publishers of Steiner into English and have given me permission to do these recordings. Please consider patronizing them as well. This is a reading of Collected Works, Volume 93a by Rudolf Steiner. 31 lecture notes by participants entitled Foundations of Esotericism. This is Lecture 15, given in Berlin on the 10th of October, 1905. Everything that is taught today in Theosophy was also contained in the schools of the Rosicrucians in the 14th century. But the inner schooling of the Rosicrucian stream was a strictly occult one. With such an occult training, very little consideration was given to the language, to the way in which things were expressed. In the world of the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries, there lived certain unassuming individuals who were not especially well known as scholars, and who also held no particular social position, but who carried on the occult stream of the Rosicrucians. They were never many. There were never more than 7 real initiates at one time. The others were occult pupils of various grades. The Rosicrucians were the messengers of the White Lodge. From them went out, in very truth, events of world significance. Everything of importance that happened during this time could eventually be traced back to the lodges of the Rosicrucians. Outwardly, quite other personalities made the history of Europe, but seen from within, the latter were the instruments of occult individualities. Even Rousseau and Voltaire were such instruments of occult individualities standing behind them. These occultists could not themselves appear under their own names. The impulse which, in the carrying out of their mission, they gave to other people could be outwardly a very simple, inconspicuous one. Sometimes the short meeting with such an unassuming man provided the opportunity for the right impulse to be given to these instruments of the occult individuals. Up to the time of the French Revolution, occult forces stood behind significant statesmen. Then they gradually withdrew, for human beings were now to become masters of their destiny. For the first time in the speeches of the French Revolution, individuals speak as individuals. The inner life remained in the background in the occult schools. In the schools of the Rosicrucians, those things were taught which are now known as the main teachings of Theosophy. The occult brotherhoods gave the impulse to every important discovery. Only then did the events play their part in the outside world. Voltaire was, in the most eminent sense, an individual directed by forward-striving brotherhoods, for the actual purpose of his being there was to set human beings on their own feet. Others stood in the service of the retrograde brotherhoods, as for example Robespierre in his later years. Everything which appears in anticipation of the future calls forth its opposite on the physical plane. In Rosicrucian schools, therefore, the same things were taught as through Theosophy today. In the outside world, however, there was no word of Theosophy. In the occult schools themselves, value is only laid on language in order to teach the outside world. The occult pupil himself must learn to use the symbols, the signs. Thus, in order to make themselves understood in the world, the initiates only have at their disposal the language used by the world at large. At the time when knowledge was still kept secret, there existed a certain system of symbols, and anyone wishing to be initiated had to learn the language of symbols. No value was laid on the spoken word as a means of expression. Even at that time the teachings were there, but the descriptive expressions were frequently lacking. Such expressions for occult teaching are, however, present in the Eastern method, which is derived from the very earliest people of India, who had received their teaching from the ancient rishis. These Indian expressions are not yet influenced by the materialistic age. The words which the Indians created are still full of the magic of the sacred primeval language. Nevertheless, what is of Indian origin cannot be made use of by us in Europe. What is right for the Indian people is not right for Europe. To begin with, because Europe itself had developed too few expressions able to introduce such teachings, an Indian impulse was necessary. Even today we must still describe many things with Indian words. But everything in occult teachings that today is brought into the open was also possessed by the Rosicrucians in the Middle Ages and beginning of modern times. There were already appropriate expressions for the most fundamental teachings. But at that time it was not yet possible to speak openly about reincarnation and karma. These truths could, however, be allowed to flow subconsciously into European culture. Paracelsus and other mystics did not speak about reincarnation. This was quite natural. They were not able to speak about it. But for all that is concerned with earthly life between birth and death, they had in the West also extremely apt expressions, though not, on the other hand, for the intervening conditions between two incarnations. One thing strongly emphasized at that time was the importance of physical life for the development of the organs of the higher bodies. When we pursue the study of the sciences, when we develop intimate spiritual friendships, all this is a process of the development of forces which will one day become active as spiritual organs. Three separate concepts have always comprised what education on the physical plane, coming from outside, should bring about in the three different bodies of man. These three aspects were called wisdom, beauty, and power or strength. See Lecture 5, Goethe's Fairy Tale. When, in the outer court of the more exoteric Rosicrucian schools, the pupils received instruction, they were told, quote, "You are to be the workers of the future." Close quote. Nothing was said about reincarnation, but the human being would also continue to work when not incarnated again in the physical body. The teaching implanted in them what should work formatively upon the organs in the future. It was said to the pupils, quote, "In your daily life, in the outer world, lead a life of wisdom, beauty, and power. Then in your higher bodies you will develop those organs which are for the future." Close quote. In Freemasonry today, the Masons of St. John will speak of the great importance of wisdom, beauty, and power, but they no longer know that thereby formative forces work on the etheric body, the astral body, and the ego, the I. When in the Middle Ages a Freemason master builder built a cathedral or a church, his name was of absolutely no importance. He himself remained in the background. In the case of the title Theologia Deutsch, also, and for the same reason, the name of the author was not mentioned. He calls himself, quote, "the Frankfurter." Close quote. No amount of learned research can discover the name. The aim of these individuals was to work outwardly on the physical plane, leaving no trace of their names behind them, but only the fruits of their activity. Let us suppose that someone had given the design and the impulse for the building of a great cathedral. He knew that the forms of the building would create in him an organ for the future. All such works will, in their effects, remain connected with the inmost part of the soul. As a rule, however, all these works in the outer world remain until he who created them finds them again and recognizes them when he returns. Under the pulpit, there is usually to be found a small picture of the architect. From this he recognizes himself again. This is the bridge which is thrown from one incarnation to another. Through wisdom, the etheric body was to be developed. Through beauty, to which piety belonged, the astral body, and through power, the individual ego, the individual I. The human being had to become a self-effacing imprint of the outer world. In ancient India, nothing of this was yet known. Brahmanism aimed at a perfecting of the self in the inner life. Bracket, there is a gap in the text, close bracket. But just in the middle of our post-Atlantean epoch, there then appeared those teachers of religion who drew attention to the renunciation of the self. This was already taught by Buddha. It was developed still more intensively in the West through Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism. They sought the perfecting of the ego, the I, in the form that is also in the outer world, not so much in the inner life as this was cultivated in India. It was in this sense that the Western occultist said to himself, quote, "Thine ego is not only within thyself, but in the world around thee." The gods have raised thee out of the mineral kingdom, out of the plant and animal kingdoms. But 3 kingdoms thou createst for thyself, the 3 kingdoms of wisdom, beauty, and power. These develop the organs of the higher man." Close quote. The human being said to himself, quote, "I stand here as the end result of a time when the mineral, plant, and animal kingdoms sacrificed themselves for me. Out of this foundation arose self-awareness, the ego. And just as the ego, the I, has been formed through these other kingdoms, so must it now itself develop the kingdoms of wisdom, beauty, and strength, in order by their means to mount still higher to a complete transformation of our etheric, astral, and ego bodies." Close quote. These 3 kingdoms are the kingdoms of science, art, and inner strength. Inner strength meaning everything that lives itself out in the will. In these 3 domains, the medieval esotericist saw the means for the further development of mankind. The transformation of the world was not given over to blind chance, but according to these 3 aspects of wisdom, beauty, and strength, the mineral, plant, and animal kingdoms were to be transformed. When the earth again becomes astral, everything will have been transformed in accordance with these 3 aspects. It was from this 3-fold point of view that the Freemasons of the Middle Ages and all esotericists built and worked. In Indian esotericism, 12 forces are differentiated, which draw man down again into physical existence. The first of these forces is avidya, ignorance. Avidya is what draws us down again into physical existence, for the simple reason that we shall only have fulfilled our mission on the earth when we have extracted from it all possible knowledge. On the other hand, we have not fulfilled our mission as long as everything that we should learn from physical existence has not yet been extracted. After avidya, what next draws us back is what the earth contains, because we ourselves have made it, which therefore belongs to our organization. When a mason, for instance, has worked on the building of a cathedral, this has become a part of himself. There is a reciprocal attraction between them. What has an organ-creating tendency for the original instigator, whether it be the work of Leonardo da Vinci or the smallest piece of work, forms an organ in the human being, and this is the cause of his return. All that the man has done, taken together, is called sanskara, or the organizing tendency which builds up the human being. This is the second thing which draws him back. Now comes the third. Before the human being entered into any incarnation, he knew nothing of an outer world. Self-awareness first began with the first incarnation. Previously, man had no consciousness of self. He had first to perceive the outer objects on the physical plane before he could develop consciousness of self. True as it is that what a man has done draws him back to the physical plane, so is it true that knowledge of things also draws him back. Consciousness is a new force which binds him to what is here. This is the third element that draws him into a new earth life. This third force is called vijnana, equals consciousness. I'm pronouncing it vijnana, readers aside. It is spelled Vijnana, end of readers aside. Up to this point, we have remained very intimately within the human soul. As the fourth stage, there appears what comes toward the consciousness from outside, what was indeed already there without man, but what he had first to learn to know with his consciousness. This was present outside in his earlier existence, but only disclosed itself after his consciousness opened to it. It is the separation between subject and object, or, as the Sanskrit writer says, the separation between name and form. in parentheses, nama rupa. Through this, man reached the outer object. This is the fourth force that draws him back, for instance, the memory of a being to which he has attached himself. Next comes what we form as mental image in connection with an external object. For example, picturing a dog is merely making a mental image, which is, however, the essential thing for the painter. It is what the intellect makes of a thing, shadayadana. Now there is a further descent into the earthly. The mental picture leads us to what we call contact with existence, sparsha. Whoever depends on the object stands at the stage of namarupa. Whoever forms pictures stands at the stage of shadayadana. The one, however, who differentiates between the pleasing and the unpleasing will reach the point where he prefers the beautiful to the unbeautiful. This is called contact with existence, sparsha. Somewhat different, however, from this contact with the outer world is what at the same time stirs inwardly as feeling. Now I myself come into action. I connect my feeling with one thing or another. That is a new element. Man becomes more involved. It is called vedana, feeling. Through vedana, something quite new again arises, that is, longing for existence. The forces which draw man back into existence awaken more and more strongly within himself. The higher forces compel all human beings to a greater or lesser degree. They are not individual. Eventually, however, quite personal forces appear, which draw him back again into the earthly world. That is the eighth force. Trishna equals thirst for existence. Still more subjective than the thirst for existence is what is named upadana, comfort in existence. With upadana, man has something in common with the animal, but he experiences it more spiritually, and it is the task of man to spiritualize what is gross in this soul element. Then comes individual existence itself, the sum of all the earlier incarnations when he was already on the earth. Bhava equals individual existence, the force of the totality of earlier incarnations. Previous incarnations draw him down into existence. With this we have retraced the stages of the nidanas up to individual birth. The esotericist differentiates two further stages which go beyond the period of individual existence. Here he differentiates a previous condition that gave the impetus toward birth, before man had ever been incarnated. This is called jata, what before birth gave the impetus to birth. The impetus toward birth is interconnected with a different impulse. It brings with it the germ of dissolution, the urge to extricate oneself from individual birth. What interests us is that this earthly existence of ours falls again into decay, and we are freed, able to become old and die. Dijara Marana. These are the 12 nidanas which work like strings, drawing us ever and again down into existence. The meaning of nidana is string, loop. There are 3 groups which belong together. First group connected with consciousness soul, avidya, sanskara, vijnana, namarupa. Second group connected with intellectual soul, shadayadana, sparsha, vedana, trishna. Third group connected with sentient soul, upadana, bhava, dijata, dijara marana. The soul has 3 members, the consciousness soul as the highest member, then the intellectual or mind soul, and the sentient soul. The first group of the nidanas from avidya to namarupa is connected with the consciousness soul, the second group with the intellectual soul, and the third from upadana to dijara marana with the sentient soul. Vijnana is characteristic of the consciousness soul, shadayadana of the intellectual soul, and the last 4 are bound up with the sentient soul. These last 4 are present in both animal and man. The end of Lecture 15. You are listening to RudolfSteinerAudio.com. As well, you can hear these podcasts at RudolfSteiner.podbean.com. Please consider becoming a patron. As well, there are two publishing houses, SteinerBooks.org in America and RudolfSteinerPress.com in England, which are the sole publishers of Steiner into English and have given me permission to do these recordings. Please consider patronizing them as well. This is a reading of Collected Works, Volume 93a by Rudolf Steiner, the lecture notes of 31 lectures by participants, entitled Foundations of Esotericism, translated by Vera and Judith Compton Burnett. This is Lecture 16, given in Berlin on the 11th of October, 1905. If we wish to understand the whole way in which karma works, a subject we are now going to approach, we must be able to form a conception of what is called nirvana. Very much is involved in a complete understanding of the significance of nirvana, but we will try to gain an introductory idea of it. In any action carried out by man, there is in fact very little present of anything that might be called freedom, for man is actually the result of his deeds in the past. This is the case in the widest sense of the word. In order that he should become what he is, all the kingdoms of nature had first to be created. The mineral, plant, and animal kingdoms, which he once had within him, he gradually put out from himself. To this must be added what he acquired in the time following the first third of the Lemurian race. All that he carried out in the way of deeds, all that he experienced in his soul as thoughts and feelings, belong also to his past, become his karma. We look into a past which at the same time shows its results in the forms around us. The whole of our surrounding world is nothing other than the result of past deeds. In the same way, man is now making preparation for what will happen in the future. We are, nevertheless, continually faced with things which are not altogether the results of past deeds, but which bring something new into the world. A certain man, let us say Mr. Keim, is the result of past deeds. The Theosophical Society, too, is the result of past deeds, and that he is brought into connection with it is also such a result. Something new arises, however, through Mr. Keim's relationship to the Theosophical Society. This again is the cause of future deeds. When light shines against a stick, a shadow arises behind it. That is actually something new. When we observe this effect, we say to ourselves, something has taken place that is new. The relationship of one thing to another is something new, the forming of the shadow. Everything which a person usually thinks, he thinks about things that have already come into being. He can, however, turn his thoughts toward relationships of a kind that have not been brought about as the result of earlier causes, but that appear in the present. This happens very seldom, for people hang on to the old, to what has formed like strata around them. Relationships which make their appearance as something altogether new form very little of the content of human thoughts. Anyone wishing to work for the future must, however, have those thoughts which will produce new connections between one thing and another. Only thoughts dealing with such connections can yield something new. One sees this best in art. What the artist creates is not there in reality. The mere form worked upon by the sculptor is not in fact there. It is not a product of nature. In nature there is only the form that is pulsed through with life. Form, by itself, would contradict natural laws. The artist builds something new out of relationships. The painter paints what arises out of relationships, light and shade. He does not paint what is actually there. He does not paint the tree, but an impression which is called up by all he experiences with regard to the tree. In practical actions, also, the human being usually produces nothing new. The majority of people do only what has already been done. Only a few people create out of moral intuition, in that they bring new duties, new deeds into the world. What is new comes into the world through relationships. This is why it is often said that the very nature of simple moral action lies in relationships. Such moral action consists, for example, in deeds brought about by a relationship based on goodwill. One finds with most actions that they are rooted in the old, even in the case of actions and events where something new makes its appearance. These too are generally rooted in the old. With more exact investigation, this usually becomes apparent. Only those actions are free which are in no way based on a foundation of the past, but where man carries out in the world only actions which are combined with the productive activity of his reason. Such actions are called in occultism creation out of nothing. All other actions are produced out of karma. Here we have two opposites, karma and its opposite, nothingness, an activity that is not rooted in karma. And now let us imagine a person whose actions, thoughts, and feelings are conditioned by karma, through deeds, thoughts, feelings rising out of the past. One may then think of him having advanced so far that all karma is eliminated, and he is therefore faced with nothingness. When he then does something, one says in occultism, he acts out of nirvana. For example, it was out of nirvana that the actions of a Buddha or a Christ arose, at least in part. In the ordinary way, a person approaches this only when he is inspired by art, religion, or world history. Action arising out of intuition comes out of nothingness. Whoever would attain to this must become completely free from karma. He can then no longer draw his impulses from the usual sources. The mood which then comes over him is that of divine bliss, a state which is also called nirvana. How does the human being ascend to nirvana? We must look back into Lemurian times. There we find man, as he is on the earth, at first going on all fours. These beings in which at that time man, in quotes, pure man, as monad, incarnated, went on all fours. Through the fact that the monads incarnated in them, these beings gradually raised their front limbs and attained an upright posture. Now for the first time karma begins. Karma, as human karma, first became possible when human beings made use of their hands for work. Before this, man made no individual karma. It was a very important stage of human development when man, from an horizontal, became a vertical being, thereby freeing his hands. In this way his development led over into the Atlantean epoch. At the next stage, man learned to make use of speech. To begin with, he learned the use of his hands, later on the use of language. Through his hands he filled the surrounding world with deeds. Through speech he filled it with words. When a man dies, there lives on in the surrounding world all that he accomplished through deeds and words. Everything that he accomplished in the way of deeds remains present as human karma. What, however, he produced in the way of words not only remains as his individual karma, but as something else essentially different. We can look back at the time when man did not as yet speak, but only performed actions. Then actions were something which only came from the single personality. They ceased, however, to be only personal when speech began. For now human beings established understanding with one another. This is an extraordinarily important moment in Atlantean development. The moment when the first sound was produced, the karma of humanity began in the world. As soon as human beings speak with one another, something common to all flows out from the whole of mankind. Then the purely personal, individual karma passes over into the general karma of humanity. With the words which emanate from us, we actually spread around us more than just ourselves. The whole of humanity is living in what we speak. Only when the deeds of our hands become selfless will they too become something for the whole of humanity. In his speaking, however, a man cannot be entirely selfish, for what he says would have to belong then to himself alone. A language can never be entirely selfish, whereas the deeds performed by the hands are mostly so. The occultist says, "What I do with my hands can be my own concern simply. What I speak as member of a nation or a tribe." Thus our life creates around us remains, personal, rudimentary remains, brought about by the deeds of our hands, and general human rudimentary remains brought about by words. These must be clearly differentiated. Everything that surrounds us in nature, in the mineral, plant, and animal kingdoms, is there as the result of earlier deeds. What is now being built up around us by our deeds is actually something new coming into the world. Each single human being brings something new into the world. Something new strikes in, and new impulses also strike in, coming from mankind as a whole. If therefore we must say, man appeared on the earth in the middle of the Lemurian age, and for the first time created his own karma. Before this, he had not created any individual karma. We must ask ourselves, where then can this karma come from, since its action played in as something new? It can only come from nirvana. At that time, something had to become active in the world that came forth from nirvana, from that which is, quote, created out of nothing, close quote. The beings who at that time fructified the earth had to reach up into nirvana. Those who fructified the four-footed creatures, so that they became human, were beings who descended from the nirvana plane. They are called monads. This is why at that time beings of this nature had to come down from the nirvana plane. The being from the nirvana plane who is in us, in the human being, is the monad. Here something new enters into the world and embodies itself in what is already there, and which for its part is entirely the result of earlier deeds. We thus differentiate three stages. The first consists in external deeds, brought about through the hands. The second is what is brought about through the spoken word, and the third by what is brought about through thought. And thought is something far more comprehensive than the spoken word. Thought is no longer, as with language, different among the different peoples, but belongs to the whole of humanity. So man ascends from actions, through words, to thoughts. And in this way he becomes an ever more universal being. There is no general norm for action, no logic for deeds. Everyone must act for himself. At the same time, there is no purely personal speech. Speech belongs to a group. And on the other hand, thought belongs to the whole of humanity. Here we have a progression from the particular to the universal in these three human stages: deeds, words, thoughts. Insofar as he expresses himself in the outer world, man leaves behind him traces of the spirit of the whole of humanity as thought, the traces of a human group soul as word, traces of his separate human being as actions. This is most clearly expressed by pointing out the effects of what is brought about through these three stages. An individuality is like a thread which goes through all forms of personal manifestation in the different incarnations. An individuality creates for further incarnations. A people, as a speech community, creates for new peoples. Humanity creates for a new humanity, for a new planet. What a man does for himself personally has significance for his next incarnation. What a nation speaks has significance for the next subrace, for the next incarnation of a people. and when a world will be there in which our entire thinking no longer lives purely as thinking, but makes its appearance in the results of this thinking, then a new humanity, that is to say, a new planet, comes into being. Without these three great perspectives, we cannot understand karma. What we think has significance for the next planetary cycles. Let us now enter into the following thoughts. Will the humanity, what remains of us, which will inhabit a future planet, will this humanity still think? Just as little as a new race will speak the same language as the previous one, just as little will the future humanity still think. It is laughable to ask in our thoughts what divinity is. On the next planet, man will not think, but will comprehend the surrounding world by means of another activity, having a form quite different from thought on this planet. Thinking is something connected with us. When we explain the world by means of thought, this world explanation is for ourselves alone. This is of immensely wide import because the individual sees how, as a member of humanity, he is also spun into the threads of karma, and how he lives and weaves into the whole karmic web. When the Eastern occultist expounds such things, he says, our whole life is of such a nature that we seem to be surrounded by the boundaries of speaking and thinking. If we do away with these, for the ordinary man, hardly anything is left. That something is still left to him when he has gone beyond all this is the result of esotericism. What then remains is the experience of nirvana. The planetary spirit who represents the being of the world is now incarnated in thinking, but in the future will be incarnated in something else. The end of Lecture 16. You are listening to RudolfSteinerAudio.com. As well, you can hear these podcasts at RudolfSteiner.podbean.com. Please consider becoming a patron. There are two publishing houses, SteinerBooks.org in America and RudolfSteinerPress.com in England, which are the sole publishers of Steiner into English and have given me permission to do these recordings. Please consider patronizing them as well. This is a reading of collected work, Volume 93a by Rudolf Steiner. It's the participants' notes of 31 lectures given in the early years, entitled Foundations of Esotericism. This is Lecture 17, given in Berlin on the 12th of October 1905, translated by Vera and Judith Compton Burnett. In occultism, we differentiate in man, firstly, his actions, insofar as by actions we understand everything which proceeds from any kind of activity connected with his hands. Secondly, speech, and thirdly, thoughts. Everything which in this sense he accomplishes with his hands brings about its karmic results in his next earthly existence. What we speak concerns not just ourselves alone, but also a group of human beings having the same language, and this affects the karma of the group or race. In words lies a greater responsibility than in deeds alone, for with them we are preparing the configuration of a future race. What we think works on even into a new formation of our earth. We therefore distinguish three stages. Firstly, human action is individual, with the exception of those actions in the human being that arise from nothingness. Secondly, man cannot speak for himself alone. Words concern a group of human beings. Thirdly, thoughts are the concern of the whole of humanity. With this, something else is connected. When we act, we stand quite alone behind our actions. When we speak, we are not quite alone in our words. Behind our words, a spiritual being is working with us, standing behind us. Just as truly as the words we utter are imprinted quite exactly in the Akasha, so is it true that with every word we utter, we impinge upon the body of a spiritual being who is incarnated in this Akashic substance, into which our words penetrate. We must take this up into our feeling life. This is why we must pay such heed to our words. When we think, we are, seemingly, quite alone within ourselves. Nevertheless, beings of a spiritual nature are active with us in our thoughts, beings still higher and more significant than those active in our speech. More lies in these things than in a whole world history. Through them much can be explained. Let us consider a thought within us. Behind this thought a spiritual being is present. If we imagine ourselves enveloped on all sides by the body of a spiritual being, we can realize that a thought is only the expression of the body of the spiritual being working into us. Every time a thought flashes through our soul, it is an impression, a kind of footprint of a higher spiritual being, just as if we were walking over damp ground, leaving footprints, and were to say, quote, "Here a person walked," close quote. This spiritual being is formed of the same substance as that of which thought consists. The thought in us can only become the imprint of a higher spiritual being, because this higher being has a body formed of the same substance as our thoughts. When our foot imprints itself in the damp earth, this imprint is a negative, a counter-image of our foot. So is it likewise with our thoughts. In the higher spiritual world there is a counter-image for every thought. Image and counter-image are as interconnected as seal and sealing wax. The substance is the higher spiritual being, which corresponds, in our analogy, to the sealing wax. Now, we call thought, in so far as it corresponds to the sealing wax, intuition. And the impression we call abstract thought. When we think, we can say, quote, "I feel the trace of what is happening in higher worlds," close quote. It is with regard to this fact that in religious writings, for instance in the Revelation of St. John, the expression, in quotes, "seal," is used. This corresponds with reality. It is also because a higher being is working with us in our words that every word is the impression of a seal. With the mystics, the counter-image is called imagination. Thus we have three levels of the thought element: the intuitive, the imaginative, and the ordinary abstract thinking. When man develops further, when abstract thought itself develops to the stage at which the beings are incarnated, who work with us when we speak, then he is a cella, an occult pupil. To be a master means to work in the substance in which the beings are incarnated, who work with us in our thoughts. Imagination gives the picture. This is why the great religious teachers of earlier times spoke pictorially, for imagination gives the picture, not abstract thoughts. In all religions, teachings were expressed in pictures. At first, the picture is for man something of lesser importance. But when he understands how to form again for himself a picture out of every thought, then he has reached a higher stage. This is the prerequisite for a quite new kind of perception. Everything depends on a man developing to the point at which he no longer thinks merely abstractly, but at all times has his thoughts in pictures. As a rule, man forms merely thoughts. The more highly developed man must think in pictures, in images. That means, quote, "to imagine," close quote. In this expression there already lies what is meant, quote, "by means of a certain power to make an imprint in something, to imagine," close quote. In creative fantasy, in the case of poet and artist, we find only a weak reflection of imagination. When a man who is seeking higher development speaks, he will try in certain cases, while speaking, to have before him the counter-image, the imago. This is the source of the mighty pictures in religious writings. Whoever develops himself so far that he can create such pictures has attained the stage of the spiritual beings who are involved in the creation of races. One who develops in himself not only pictures but intuitions is not only involved in the creation of races, but in the creation of the next planetary existence. From the pictures there will resound what later will be manifested on the earth. But whoever works out of intuition creates something which is not yet existent, which is nowhere manifested. That is to say, he creates out of nirvana. This concept is inherent in every apocalypse. What will be manifested in the future can only be created out of intuition. Through abstract thinking, one makes a copy of something that exists. Through imagination, a man allows himself to be fructified by the formative spirit within him. Imagination corresponds to hidden realities which have arisen through the fructifying impulse of higher beings. Thus one can see these higher spiritual beings on the astral plane. The prerequisite for this is to develop a speech that is not the expression of abstract thoughts, but of pictures. This is why mediums also speak in imaginations, in pictures and symbols, but unconsciously. Behind them the spirit is forming the symbols. The occult pupil does this in full consciousness, nevertheless in a way that is not arbitrary. In so doing, he allows himself to be fructified by the spirit. Just as man develops himself to the stage when he can create pictures and receive intuitions, so before he came into existence, the external world was active, and indeed in such a way that in everything which is around us as mineral existence, as purely physical nature, intuitions are working as creative forces. The crystal is external, insofar as it reveals itself to the senses. It is, however, created by means of intuitions. Behind the entire physical world lies a cosmos of intuitions, and, finally, a being, the planetary spirit, who produces the intuitions. Behind all language, beings of imagination are working, and with them the spirit of the race. In all living things, beings at the same spiritual level are at work. Behind all plants, imaginations are active. The completed form of the plant comes forth from imagination, and behind it stands a spiritual being, and everything imbued with consciousness and perception has arisen out of thought itself. Now let us look at the whole universe, to begin with in its physical aspect: earth, sun, moon, and stars, the Milky Way, and so on. Behind it stands a great intuitive spirit. It is the same spirit that manifests in our actions. He also stands behind the whole universe. Christianity calls him the Father. Because he is so little known, he is also called the unknown God, and in theosophical literature, the first Logos. Behind everything living stands the spirit of imagination. It is the same spirit who is also working in our speech. This is why the Christian religion calls him the Word. Here something quite exact and actual is meant. This spirit who stands behind everything living is still working today in our speech, in each of our words, and is therefore rightly called, quote, the Word, close quote. Another designation is the Son, or Christ. He is the spirit who lives as imagination in everything that has life. Then we ascend to what is conscious, what has a certain degree of perception, of consciousness. Everything of an animal nature and what, in man, bracket, there is a gap in the text, close bracket. This can already be grasped by thoughts. It is contained in every being. What takes place in the animal occurs in the first place within itself, abstract consciousness. All consciousness existent in the world also lives in man, in abstract thinking. Within himself, man calls it, in quotes, spirit, insofar as it works outside in the creative forces of nature, he calls it, in quotes, Holy Spirit. This is what underlies all perception and consciousness. Illness exists only in separateness. Spirit as such cannot be ill, but only when it is incarnated in lower bodies. The word heilig, holy, means heil sein, to be whole or well. It expresses the fact that the Spirit which flows through the world outside is healthy. The Holy Spirit is nothing other than Spirit which is healthy through and through. This is why anyone who truly unites himself with the Holy Spirit, Heiliger Geist, receives the power of healing, heilen. This must be in harmony with the Holy Spirit, flowing through the world. This is the Spirit which works from man to man as the true healer. If we now turn our attention to the physical plane, we find in the first place what we perceive through the senses. Behind is the great intuitive Spirit. Everything physically present has been made by this Spirit. Thus, behind everything that lives in form as such, that can be perceived by the senses, stands the Father Spirit, the first Logos. Through merely observing this, we do not change it, but a change comes about when we act. Then we not only change what exists outside in the world, but also the forces working outside in the world. The moment we act, we create a change on the physical plane. Behind these changes is also the change in the underlying force corresponding to the first Logos. This we influence by our actions, and that remains, is there, cannot pass away, unless it be eradicated by the same force which called it forth. And the change that is evoked in the great intuitive world through our deeds is what takes hold of us again as karma. From the point of view of karma, what calls the human being to return to the physical world once more is rupa. This is because it was accomplished in rupa, through the body, through man's external nature. Thus we create in the body, in rupa, when we act on the external intuitions. The second sphere in which man is not so self-reliant today, but where another spirit is working with him, is speech. Here we make impressions in a world that is not only physical but has life. In the world of life, the imaginations remain from what we speak about, formative forces which create new races. Our present race has been created out of what lay behind the words of earlier races. This is embodied in our race. In addition, we have to consider everything which belongs in any way to imagination. This shows us that with our words we make impressions in the realm of the sun, in the realm of the second Logos. These come back as the collective karma of the whole race, for the word is not created by each of us alone. The spirit of the race is working with us. What is the foundation for this form of karma? Where is the spirit of the race working? The spirit of the race is active in man's feeling, permeates the entire world of feeling. This resonates with what a human being has in common with his group. What works in a much wider sense on karma is feeling, vedana. Thus, firstly, rupa, the corporality. Secondly, vedana, feeling. For those people who have not yet become chelas, feeling has great importance where the perception of the second Logos and everything living is concerned. The aim of science is to study animals and plants aside from life. Even the greatest individuals of learning today have not yet advanced beyond the stage of comprehending life with feeling. It is the imaginative understanding which first enables them to look into life itself. In the outer world, thought is connected with everything having sensation and consciousness. This has one thing in common for us: perception. The fact that we can in any way perceive the outer world in physical space as a world of color and sound is only possible because we are able to transpose it into thoughts. We receive perceptions, we think about them. If there were no thoughts in the perceptions already, it would be the greatest folly on man's part to form thoughts about them. Thoughts would then be mere illusions if the perceptions had not arisen through thoughts. From the combination of perceptions, it follows that, in the first place, perceptions are built up by thoughts from which we can then extract the laws of nature. These are nothing other than thoughts. It is the creative spirit, the Holy Spirit. Perception is the boundary between the two, where our thoughts come in contact with the creative thoughts outside us. Thus, with a thought that we have, we cannot work directly on life, but on the consciousness, which in the outer world is itself thought. Through thought we leave behind traces in all the spiritual beings who have brought about consciousness. What man builds up on the basis of perception in the way of thoughts, and what he produces as thoughts, has its repercussions on everything which makes perception necessary. Thirdly, therefore, we differentiate perception, or sanya, the third element which has an effect on karma. Readers aside, sanya, I'm pronouncing it that way, is spelled S-A-N-J-N-A. My apologies if I'm pronouncing that wrong. End of readers aside. Through all actions, we call forth counter-actions as karma, because we make an impact on the intuitive world, rupa. Through all words, we make an impact on the world of creative feelings around us, vedana. With our thoughts about perceptions, we make an impact on the whole world of thoughts outside us, sanya. What we perceive around us now will no longer be there when we appear again on earth. Everything, therefore, which we think in connection with our world of perception will have no effect whatever on the future incarnation. Only in this incarnation will it have a karma-building force. Thought works upon our present character. What comes forth from feeling is essentially connected with our surroundings. What enters into the world of imagination comes back to us in the following incarnation in such a way that it appears within as inborn tendencies and outside as opportunities. Through our inborn tendencies, we call toward us opportunities offered by the world, opportunities which form our destiny through tendencies which have their source in karma. Thoughts form the character. The tendencies or disposition lead karmically to the opportunities. Actions bring about the external destiny, all the bodily circumstances into which man is born. What we carry out through rupa, our bodily nature, is our actual destiny. That comes back to us karmically. Only by reaching the stage of imagination can one consciously create inborn tendencies for further incarnations. Herein we find the secret of how the great founders of religions projected their influence beyond their own time. The pictures which they gave the people released dispositional tendencies for the following incarnations. Every picture that they instilled into the soul reappeared in the entire feeling world of the human being. Either he wins such imaginations for himself, or he receives them from his teacher. We win them for ourselves when we have gained control over our entire life of feeling. This is the case with the occult pupil. His feelings are subject to his own control. The rest of humanity is cared for in this respect by the founders of religions. A religion is the feeling world of future races. Outwardly, therefore, it can be submerged, for it lives on in human tendencies. Today, tendencies are coming to the surface which were implanted in mankind in the 13th and 14th centuries. It is important that the materialistic images of the present day do not take root in human hearts, for in future times, if they were not opposed by spiritual ideas, they would fill human beings with the most brutal instincts, directed to the world of the senses only. Those desires and wishes live in man which are produced out of imagination. This is his desire nature, sanskara. Everything intuitive in man, the great impulses which he receives from the highest initiates, these actually overcome the karma of deeds. He who raises himself to intuitions as such penetrates through the physical world up to the Father Spirit. He who possesses intuitive knowledge can affect the karma arising out of deeds. He begins to consciously limit his karma. For the ordinary person, only those beings are comprehensible who also have consciousness. When he progresses to imagination, life also becomes comprehensible. When he progresses to intuition, he can advance as far as the intuitive forces. A person can affect his karma to the degree in which he himself possesses intuition, or he must receive it in the form of great moral laws from the high initiates. Vijnana is the name used for the consciousness necessary for the overcoming of karma. And now let us think of a man living in the world, carrying out his actions, and dying. After his death, something of him still remains here in this world which he has woven into it. Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sanskara, and Vijnana. These five are the balance of his account, his personal destiny as Rupa, the destiny of the nation into which he is born as Vedana, the actual fact of his birth on this earth as Sanya. In addition, working with Sanskara, the desire nature, and Vijnana, the consciousness. These are the five skandhas. What a man gives out into the world remains as the five skandhas in the world. These are the foundation of his new existence. They have progressively less effect when he has consciously developed something of the last two. The more he has gained conscious power over Vijnana, the more does he gain the power of consciously incarnating in the physical body. In their essential nature, the skandhas are identical with karma. Number 1, rupa, corporality, actions. Number 2, vedana, feeling. Number 3, sanya, perception. Number 4, sanskara, desire. Number 5, vijnana, consciousness necessary to the overcoming of karma. The end of Lecture 17. You are listening to RudolfSteinerAudio.com. As well, you can hear these podcasts at RudolfSteiner.podbean.com. Please consider becoming a patron. There are 2 publishing houses, SteinerBooks.org in America and RudolfSteinerPress.com in England, which are the sole publishers of Steiner into English and have given me permission to do these recordings. Please consider patronizing them as well. This is a reading of Collected Works Volume 93a by Rudolf Steiner, the participants' notes for 31 lectures in the early years, entitled Foundations of Esotericism. This is translated by Vera and Judith Compton Burnett. This is Lecture 18, given in Berlin on the 16th of October, 1905. If we wish to obtain a more exact knowledge of how karma comes about, we must go back a certain way in the development of humanity. If we transpose ourselves back some thousands of years, we find Europe covered with ice. At that time, the glaciers of the Alps forced their way right down into the low-lying plain of northern Germany. The districts in which we now live were then cold and raw. Here dwelt a race of human beings